I'm Kathy Peth. I married into a farming family in the county. My husband's family's been here since the early 1870s, so he qualifies as a settler. I am a docent at the museum. My father-in-law helped start the museum. He would be laughing at the idea that I'm volunteering here. And I also help out with the school tours at the Skagit City School. Mostly I talk about farming because that's my family's history. We still farm on some of the same ground that my husband's grandfather had here in the county in 1872. And I often think that a lot of the things we use farming would be recognized by the early settlers. This is an early plow that was pulled by horses, but it's the same shape and the same function that's pulled by tractors now. This is an early way to transport feed either into town to sell or out to the field to feed the animals. And the same thing is available here or on the back of a truck. We still make hay, which was one of the settlers' first crops. The hay went to Seattle to feed the horses that pulled the trolleys and the wagons and the equipment in Seattle, also to Portland and to Vancouver. The settlers, the pioneers here raised oats, which fed their own workhorses. You had to figure about a third of your crops to feed your own animals to work the ground. Now you have to figure about a third of your crop in order to buy the fuel to run your tractors. Also, one of the early crops in the area was cabbage. There weren't a lot of vegetables that would keep for the winter other than cabbage and potatoes. So they were a favorite crop either to feed your own family or to sell for other people to feed their family. You would get really tired of cabbage over the winter, but you would still have green vegetables in your ice house at the end of the year. You could have sauerkraut, you could have boiled cabbage, you could have fried cabbage, you could have stuffed cabbage, you could be really, really sick of cabbage, but at least you had something to eat. When the pioneers got here in the 1860s, they found Native Americans who didn't need to farm. They had enough food that they could hunt and gather, that they didn't need to break ground, and they weren't interested in making money off the rest of it. So they had seafood, they had camas root, they had berries, they had deer and wild goats and wild sheep, and they really didn't need to farm. When the settlers got here, the first thing they did was plant a garden so they'd have food for their family. And then they planted as much as they could that they could sell. And that was the cabbage and the oats and the hay. And we still raise crops to sell. And that's what farming is. Some of the crops you eat, most of the crops you eat, some of the crops you beautify your garden and your house with, like tulips and sod for your lawn. But primarily, Skagit County is still raising cabbage for seed. We still plant oats, we plant wheat, we plant barley and rye and some flax. Flax has a beautiful blue blossom. We plant potatoes. Potatoes will last in storage all winter. They're a great crop both for pioneers and for now. Some of the grains we're planting now go for specialty flours to make flour, ground wheat, for making bread and cinnamon rolls. Some of the grain that's grown now is going to distilleries. There's a couple of distilleries in the works that are going to make alcoholic beverages out of the grain. There are a few places that raise grapes for wine. There are still lots and lots of dairy cows, although fewer farms, but more cows. The area has grown sheep and hogs and beef cattle. We have beef cattle. Across the road from us, the people are raising miniature donkeys. As for crops, Skagit County could probably grow almost everything with the exception of the hot weather crops. So we talk about that with the kids, and we ask them if they know whether we could grow bananas, which of course we can't. And we don't grow artichokes, and we don't grow citrus. We do have an almost perfect climate for the cole crops, for broccoli, for Brussels sprouts, for cabbage, for cauliflower. We've grown carrots here, celery. Have you ever noticed, kids, that sometimes in the springtime when we have tractors and equipment in the field working ground, that there are birds that fly over and follow the tractor? The birds are coming after worms, and part of our presentation at the school are, now I have to look, anatomically correct fake worms, and there are enough for each student to get one and say, ooh, ick, but they can examine them and find out which end is the mouth and where the stomach is, this is the stomach, and the tail where the poop comes out, and then we get to talk about worm poop and why the birds are following the tractors around. The tractors dig up the worms that are in the soil. The worms are good for the soil because when they move through it, they lighten it and make room for the seeds at the roots to come down from the seeds and grow better. And the worms eat grass and stuff that's been worked up in the ground, and they digest it in their stomachs, and they poop out what's left. And the worm poop is good fertilizer for the crops. It's called casts, in case your mother doesn't let you say poop at the table. One of the really important things, let's put this over here, that the ground is good for in the Skagit Valley is all the critters that are in the ground that loosen the soil. The worms are one of them, and if we look through here, we can find the worms. There are also little bugs. There are little bitty threads of things called nematodes. They're all adding to the food that's in the ground that helps feed the crops, the seeds that we grow. We do still grow an awful lot of seed crops. For a time, we grew more than 3/4 of the cabbage seed necessary for the entire world.